He was a cowboy with a bullet still inside. She said, "Then I'll stay till it's out." The sun was beginning to set over the small town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows over the dusty streets. The town had always been quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else and where life moved slowly, almost lazily. But even in a peaceful town like this, trouble had a way of leaving its mark. For Jack, the cowboy, those marks were more than just memories. They were scars that never truly healed. Jack had been through things that most people could not imagine. Years ago, he had been caught in a fight over cattle, something that had started as a simple dispute and had turned violent in an instant. The memory of the gunshot still haunted him, though the wound had never fully healed. A bullet had lodged itself near his lung, too dangerous to remove at the time. He had survived, but every day reminded him of what he had lost and what he had endured. It was not just the pain in his body that weighed him down. It was the weight of his memories, the things he could never forget. Despite all this, Jack carried on. He woke up every morning with the sun, laced up his boots, and made his way to the stables. He fed the horses, checked on the cattle, and tended to the land. His life was simple, but it was not easy. The bullet inside him made even simple tasks a challenge. He had to be careful, always aware of his body and its limits. Yet he never complained. Complaining in his mind was for people who could afford to complain. Survival, for him, was about action, about enduring, about keeping his head down and doing the work. People in Willow Creek respected Jack. They respected his skill with horses, his knowledge of the land, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. But they also kept their distance. Jack had a way of keeping people out, not because he was unkind, but because he had learned that opening up could be dangerous. Pain, he had discovered, was a private thing. Sharing it made one vulnerable, and in a world where danger could appear at any moment, vulnerability was a luxury he could not afford. Jack's home was a small cabin at the edge of town, surrounded by wide fields and the occasional cluster of trees. It was modest but sturdy, built with hands that knew hard work. Inside, it was simple and practical. A few pieces of worn furniture, a small stove for cooking, and walls lined with photographs of people and horses from his past. Each photograph told a story, though most of the stories were for his eyes alone. Some pictures made him smile, while others brought a twinge of sadness. Yet he kept them all. They were reminders of life lived, of moments worth remembering. One evening, as Jack was brushing down his favorite horse, a soft voice called out from the edge of the corral. "Excuse me, is this your horse?" Jack looked up, squinting against the low sun. Standing there was a young woman with a warm smile and eyes that seemed to see more than she let on. Her hair was the color of chestnut, catching the sunlight, and her clothes were simple but neat, like someone who had traveled a long way but still cared about appearances. "Yes," Jack said cautiously, his voice rough from years of talking to the wind and the horses more than people. "She's mine. You know horses," the woman nodded. "A little. I've always loved them. I just arrived in town and I thought I'd take a look around." Her name was Clara, and there was something about her presence that was unusual in Willow Creek. People didn't often arrive suddenly without a story or a reason, and yet she seemed unafraid, almost curious in a way that made Jack uneasy. Not because she was dangerous, but because curiosity had a way of getting people into trouble, and Jack had long learned that trouble was best avoided. Over the next few days, Clara found reasons to visit the stables. Sometimes she would help with small tasks, other times she would simply watch Jack work. She asked questions, but not the kind that felt intrusive. Her questions were thoughtful, gentle, and often made Jack think. Slowly, Jack began to notice things about her. She had a kindness that was quiet but firm, a strength that was easy to miss unless one paid attention. She smiled at the horses, laughed when they did something silly, and never judged the people or the work around her. Jack, for his part, continued his routine. He made no effort to engage beyond polite conversation. It was easier that way. Pain, after all, was personal, and he had no desire to share it with anyone, no matter how kind. Yet, despite his efforts, he found himself noticing Clara more than he wanted. He noticed the way she would tilt her head when she was curious, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, and the small ways she tried to connect with the world around her. One evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, Clara stayed behind after the others had left the stables. "Jack," she said softly, approaching him as he leaned against the fence, You don't have to do everything alone, you know. Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable. He wanted to dismiss her words, to say that he had always done things alone and always would. But something in her eyes made him pause. They weren't pitying or demanding. They were understanding, almost like she could see the weight he carried without him saying a word. I do what I have to, he said finally, his voice low. It's easier that way. Clara nodded, not pressing further. Sometimes, she said, easier isn't always better. Sometimes it's okay to let someone in even if it's hard. Her words lingered with Jack long after she left. That night, as he lay in his small cabin, he thought about his life, about the choices he had made, and about the invisible bullet that had changed everything. He thought about the times he had avoided people, the nights he had spent alone, and the weight of the memories he carried. He had survived, yes, but survival had come at a cost that few understood. The next morning, Jack returned to the stables, as he always did, but he found himself looking around, expecting Clara to appear. And when she did, with her calm confidence and gentle smile, he felt a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. He didn't know if he could let her get close, didn't know if he could trust anyone with the truth of his pain. But at the same time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to start thinking about what it might feel like to share a burden instead of carrying it alone. Days turned into weeks, and Clara continued to be a presence in his life. She asked about his work, shared stories of her travels, and slowly began to break down the walls Jack had built. He found himself talking to her more than he had with anyone in years. Not about the bullet, not yet, but about simple things, the horses, the land, the weather. It was a small step, but for Jack it was significant. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the fields, Clara said something that caught him off guard. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Jack looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes focused on the horizon. "More than most," he said quietly. He didn't elaborate. Some things were too heavy to share easily. Clara nodded, but she didn't push. "I don't need to know everything," she said. "I just want to be here, that's all." Her words struck something deep in Jack. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope. Not that his pain would disappear, but that maybe someone could understand it, maybe someone could stay despite it. He wanted to tell her the truth, to admit that he carried a bullet inside him that had shaped his entire life. But he wasn't ready, not yet. Still, her presence was a balm, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could find a light if someone was willing to care. And so life in Willow Creek continued. Jack worked his land, tended his horses, and carried his secret pain. But now, alongside him, was Clara, a quiet force of patience and understanding. She had not asked for anything in return, only offering her presence and her willingness to stay. And in that simple act, Jack began to understand that healing was not only about surviving. It was about letting someone in, trusting that the world could still hold kindness, and realizing that even a heart weighed down by a bullet could find hope again. By the time the first snow of winter fell on Willow Creek, Jack found himself laughing more, smiling more, and feeling a warmth he had not known in years. The bullet was still inside him, a silent reminder of the past, but Clara's presence had begun to lighten the load. He did not yet know how their story would unfold, but for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where pain did not have to be faced alone. And as he looked at her one evening, silhouetted against the pink sky, he realized something profound. For the first time in a long time, he felt the faint stirrings of trust, the courage to let someone stay, and the beginning of a bond that could withstand even the deepest wounds. Days turned into weeks, and the slow rhythm of life in Willow Creek continued as it always had. The town itself remained quiet, with its dusty streets and simple wooden buildings, but a small, subtle change was taking place near the stables. Jack's routine, once solitary and unbroken, was gradually being shared with someone else, Clara. Clara had settled into a comfortable rhythm herself. She didn't rush into the town's social life or demand attention. Instead, she quietly observed, learning the routines, the small details that made Willow Creek different from the other towns she had visited. But her attention was mostly on Jack. She noticed everything, the way he moved carefully, the way he winced slightly when lifting something too heavy, the way he sometimes paused mid-task, his eyes staring off as if he were recalling something painful. Jack, for his part, had begun to expect her presence. He did not openly admit it, but there were moments when he found himself scanning the horizon, wondering if she would be there, offering her quiet companionship. It was strange for him, this feeling of anticipation. He had spent so many years alone, trusting no one, that even noticing someone's presence felt foreign. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, Clara approached him while he was mending a fence. The boards were old and worn, and Jack had been working carefully, knowing that any sudden movement could strain his side where the bullet rested. Clara carried a small basket with her, filled with apples she had picked from the town's orchard. "I thought you might like a snack," she said, holding out the basket. Her smile was gentle, unassuming, but there was a warmth in it that made Jack hesitate. He took the basket with a small nod, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. "Thanks," he said finally, his voice low. He didn't ask questions or make small talk. He simply returned to his work, keeping his eyes focused on the fence. Clara didn't mind. She simply sat nearby, watching, letting him work in his own way. As days passed, Clara's presence became a steady part of his life. She would help with chores, carry water, mend clothes, or simply sit quietly nearby while Jack worked. She had an easy patience, never rushing, never demanding more than he could give. It was a strange feeling for Jack, who had long since learned to rely on no one. Her patience felt almost unfamiliar, but not in a bad way. It was comforting. Then one evening after the work was done, Clara asked to take a walk with him. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool with the approach of night. Jack hesitated at first, unsure if he wanted company, but something in Clara's calm expression encouraged him to agree. They walked side by side along a narrow trail that led to the edge of the fields. The land stretched wide, with the wind brushing gently against them. Jack kept his eyes on the ground, but Clara spoke freely, sharing small stories from her past, tales of towns she had visited, of people she had met, and of simple joys that had made her life meaningful. Jack listened quietly. He rarely spoke of himself, but he found that her stories made him remember parts of his own life he had long pushed aside. Memories of simpler times, of friends and family, and even small moments of laughter began to surface. He felt a strange mix of emotions, nostalgia, sadness, and most unexpectedly a flicker of hope. After some time, Clara fell silent. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Jack," she said softly, "I feel like there's something you're carrying that's bigger than all this work." "Bigger than anything I can see." Jack's hands tensed slightly on the reins of his horse. He wasn't used to being confronted in this way. Most people either ignored his quiet suffering or didn't notice it at all. But Clara noticed. She saw the subtle pain in his movements, the tension in his shoulders, the way he sometimes drew in a sharp breath as if bracing for something. I manage," he said finally, keeping his eyes forward. "It's nothing that anyone else needs to know." Clara shook her head gently. "It's not nothing. I can see it, Jack. You don't have to tell me everything, but I want you to know that I'm here. I want to be here if you'll let me." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet promise. Jack wanted to resist, to push her away as he had done with everyone else. But he didn't. For some reason, her presence felt safe. Not because she could fix things, but because she seemed willing to stay despite the pain she could sense in him. Over the next days, Jack found himself speaking more openly, but carefully. He didn't mention the bullet right away. That was still too personal, too raw. But he began to share stories of his past, memories of his family, of the cattle drives, of times when life had been both cruel and kind. Clara listened, always with patience, never interrupting, never judging. She laughed when his stories were light and offered quiet sympathy when they were heavy. One morning, Jack awoke to find Clara already outside, brushing down a horse. "Good morning," she said, her voice light but sincere. "Thought I'd help before the day gets too busy." Jack nodded, feeling an unfamiliar sense of gratitude. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He didn't say more because words felt inadequate for what he was beginning to feel. As they worked side by side, Clara observed the subtle ways Jack moved, the way he favored one side, the way he occasionally grimaced when bending too quickly. She didn't ask questions. She simply noted these things, offering her assistance when she could. Over time, Jack began to rely on her presence, even if he didn't fully realize it. It was comforting to have someone notice without demanding, someone willing to walk alongside him without judgment. Then came the evening when Jack's secret could no longer remain hidden. They had been sitting by the corral after feeding the horses, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Jack had shifted in his chair, wincing slightly, and Clara finally spoke. "Jack," she said softly, "you're hurt. I can see it. That's more than just a scrape or a bruise." "You're carrying something inside you, aren't you?" Jack's eyes flickered toward her, wary, hesitant. He had not intended to reveal this part of himself, not yet, not to anyone. But Clara's calm, unafraid gaze made him pause. There was no fear in her, no judgment. Just understanding. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice low. "There's a bullet. It's been inside me for years. I've managed, but it's always there, always reminding me." Clara nodded slowly. She did not flinch, did not pull away. Instead, she took a small step closer. "Then I'll stay till it's out," she said simply, her words carrying a weight of promise and patience. Jack stared at her, unable to speak. Her words were unlike anything he had ever heard. They were not pitying, not demanding. They were steady, unwavering. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility that he did not have to carry this burden alone. From that evening on, their bond deepened. Clara became more than just a friend or companion. She became a presence Jack could rely on. She helped him with his daily routines, but more importantly, she helped him face the emotional weight he had carried for so long. She did not rush him, did not force him to confront things before he was ready. She simply stayed, day after day, showing through her actions that she would not leave, no matter how heavy his burden. Jack, in turn, began to open up slowly. He shared memories of his family, the times before the shooting, the people he had lost and the friends he had loved. He spoke of the pain, of the nights when it felt unbearable, and of the quiet moments when he thought he might not survive. Clara listened, always patient, offering a gentle word or a comforting presence. She did not try to fix things, for she knew that healing was not about fixing but about being present. As winter approached, their lives intertwined even more. They worked together, shared meals, and spent quiet evenings talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Jack began to notice the subtle ways Clara cared for him, not just through her actions, but through her attention to the small details, the little things that made life in Willow Creek feel warmer, safer, more alive. And slowly, Jack realized that for the first time in many years he felt hope. The bullet inside him was still there, a reminder of the past, but with Clara by his side, it no longer felt like a weight he had to carry alone. He did not yet know what the future would hold, or how long it would take for him to truly heal, but he knew one thing. He had someone who would stay, someone who would not turn away, and that made all the difference in the world. The days passed with quiet routines, laughter at small jokes, and shared moments of peace. Clara had become a part of his life, and Jack had become a little more open to the idea that vulnerability did not have to mean loss. With each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, a silent promise that even the deepest wounds could find comfort, not in solitude, but in the unwavering presence of someone who cared. By the time the first snow of winter fell, Jack was beginning to understand that healing was not just about removing the bullet. It was about letting someone in, trusting, and allowing himself to feel once more. Clara had shown him that trust could be gentle, patience could be powerful, and love could exist even in the most unexpected places. And in that quiet, snow-covered town, two souls who had once carried their burdens alone began to walk together, step by step, toward a future that neither had imagined but both were willing to face, side by side. Winter had settled fully over Willow Creek. The first snow had melted slowly into icy patches on the fields, and the chill in the air reminded everyone that life, no matter how quiet, always carried its challenges. For Jack, the cold was sharper than usual. The bullet lodged near his lung made even simple movements ache, and he had to be careful with every step, every lift, every breath. He had learned to live with it, but now, with Clara by his side, those aches felt less like burdens to bear alone and more like reminders of the support he had. Clara had grown into her role naturally. She was never demanding, never intrusive, but her presence was constant. She learned how to read Jack's body, noticing the small signs of strain, the way he sometimes shifted his weight to compensate for pain, or the moments when his hand trembled slightly as he lifted a tool. Without asking, she offered help, carrying heavier loads, tending to the horses more carefully, or simply sitting beside him when the pain flared. One morning, Jack attempted to chop firewood for the cabin. It was simple work for most, but for him it was strenuous. The cold air burned his lungs, and every swing of the axe sent a sharp reminder of the bullet inside. He stopped mid-swing, gripping the handle tightly, his face contorted with effort. Clara, noticing the sudden pause, stepped forward without hesitation. "Let me," she said softly. Jack shook his head, not wanting to appear weak. "You don't have to," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "I want to," she said firmly but kindly. "We're in this together, remember." Her words struck him in a way nothing else had. He had spent years surviving alone, believing that needing help was shameful. Yet here was Clara, not pushing him, not judging him, but offering support freely. Slowly, he stepped aside, allowing her to take over, and felt a strange mix of relief and gratitude. It was a small act, but it was one of the many steps toward a new kind of trust. Over the following weeks, Clara and Jack fell into a routine that balanced work and quiet companionship. They spent hours in the stables, grooming horses and mending fences, and evenings by the stove in Jack's cabin, sharing meals and quiet conversation. Clara had a way of making even the simplest moments feel meaningful. When Jack poured her a cup of coffee, she would smile warmly, as though the gesture was not mundane but significant. When he spoke about his past, she listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Jack finally began to open up more deeply. He had been sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Clara watched him for a moment, sensing that he wanted to speak but was struggling to find the words. "You know," he began slowly, "most people, they don't see the pain, they see the work, the routine, the smiles I try to wear. But inside," he paused, taking a deep breath, "there's always a reminder, a bullet that never came out. And it isn't just the wound, it's the memories, the things I lost because of it." Clara reached out, her hand brushing gently against his. "I don't need to know every detail," she said softly, "but I want to be here, not to fix it, but to stay with you while you carry it." Jack looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of vulnerability and gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt understood without words. He did not have to hide the pain, and he did not have to pretend that survival was easy. Clara's presence made it possible for him to accept that sharing a burden did not make him weak. It made him human. The winter days were long and sometimes harsh. Jack struggled with flare-ups of pain, moments when the bullet shifted slightly and made movement almost unbearable. Clara stayed with him through it all. She would sit by his side, holding his hand or rubbing his back, whispering encouragements that were simple but powerful. She never complained, never looked away, and never left. Her patience and dedication became the steady rhythm in his life that balanced his moments of pain with moments of comfort. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Jack sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. The ache in his chest had flared unexpectedly, and he felt the weight of years of struggle pressing down on him. Clara knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Jack," she said softly, "you don't have to carry it all alone. You never did." He shook his head, tears threatening to spill. "I've always had to," he admitted. "There's no one who understands, no one who could really stay." Clara's eyes softened, her voice firm but gentle. "I can stay. I want to stay, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I'll be here until the bullet is gone." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise that penetrated the walls Jack had built around his heart. He had spent years believing that no one could endure what he had lived through, but Clara was proving otherwise. Her presence was a balm, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could be met with patience and care. As the days passed, Jack began to let himself lean on Clara more. He accepted help with chores, allowed her to sit with him during flare-ups of pain, and slowly began to share more of his past. He spoke of the shooting, the fear and confusion he felt, and the years of living with a constant reminder of mortality. Clara listened, never interrupting, never judging, only offering her quiet understanding. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. They found joy in small moments. The way the horses nuzzled their hands, the warmth of a shared meal, the laughter that occasionally broke through the tension of the day. Jack realized that happiness did not have to be grand or complicated. It could be found in simple, steady companionship. Clara's presence made even the coldest, hardest days bearable. Winter eventually gave way to early spring, and with it came new challenges. Jack had to prepare the fields for planting, a task that was physically demanding and often exacerbated the pain in his chest. Clara, ever attentive, helped wherever she could. She carried heavy loads, repaired tools, and reminded Jack to rest when necessary. She never demanded acknowledgement or thanks. Her care was genuine and unconditional. One afternoon while working in the field, Jack paused, leaning on his hoe. The pain flared suddenly, sharp and unrelenting. Clara immediately came to his side, steadying him and helping him sit down. She held his hand as he took slow, careful breaths, whispering words of encouragement. "You're doing great," she said softly. "You've done so much already. Just take it one step at a time." Jack closed his eyes, feeling a mix of frustration and relief. He hated feeling weak, hated relying on someone else, but at the same time, he felt an unfamiliar sense of comfort. Clara's presence made the pain less isolating, less frightening. She did not erase it, but she made it bearable. As the weeks turned into months, Jack began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was laughing more often, smiling more easily, and even finding moments of lightness in his daily work. Clara had brought a new rhythm to his life, one that balanced effort with care, pain with compassion, and solitude with companionship. One evening, after a long day in the fields, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the town. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the wind carried the scent of new grass and blooming flowers. Jack turned to Clara, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought anyone could stay, not like this, not through all of it." Clara smiled softly. "I told you," she said, "I'll stay till the bullet is out, and even then I'll stay for everything else too." Her words were more than reassurance. They were a testament to the bond they had built. Jack felt a deep, unspoken gratitude. For the first time in years, he realized that vulnerability did not have to mean loneliness. Pain did not have to be endured in isolation. And love, even in its quietest, simplest form, could be a source of healing. The snow melted fully, and spring brought new life to Willow Creek. Jack's chest still bore the bullet, a reminder of past struggles, but with Clara by his side, it no longer felt like a burden he had to carry alone. Together they faced each day, step by step, hand in hand, their bond growing stronger with every challenge and every quiet, shared moment. And in those moments, Jack began to understand that healing was not only physical. The bullet in his chest was a part of him, yes, but so was the love and patience Clara offered. The two intertwined, creating a balance between endurance and trust, pain and hope, solitude and companionship. Through winter's hardships and spring's renewal, Jack and Clara learned the quiet strength of commitment. She had stayed, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. He had begun to open his heart, not fully healed yet, but ready to let someone walk beside him. And in that small, quiet town, amid horses, fields, and snow-melt streams, a love was growing, one born from patience, courage, and the unwavering promise to stay, no matter how long it took. Absolutely. Here's part 4 of your story, expanded to around 1,600 words in simple, engaging English, completing the journey of Jack and Clara, focusing on healing, trust, and hope for the future. Spring had fully arrived in Willow Creek. The days were longer, warmer, and filled with the soft hum of life returning to the fields. Trees had begun to bud, the air smelled of fresh grass, and the town felt more alive after the quiet winter. For Jack, however, life was still a delicate balance. The bullet inside his chest was a constant reminder of a past he could not erase, and the daily aches and flares were reminders of how fragile life could be. Yet, alongside Clara, he began to feel a hope he had not known in years. Clara's presence had become more than comforting, it had become essential. She moved through each day with careful attention to Jack, anticipating his needs without being asked. She would prepare meals that were easy on his chest, carry supplies from the stables, and spend long hours simply sitting by him when the pain flared. Her patience was extraordinary. She never pressured him to confront his fears, never scolded him for struggling, and never left his side. She stayed, day after day, proving through action that love could endure even the heaviest burdens. One morning, Jack woke earlier than usual. The sunrise painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, and the town was just beginning to stir. Jack felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that he hadn't felt in years. Today was the day he had agreed to see the doctor about removing the bullet. It was a thought that filled him with both relief and fear. Relief because the physical pain would finally be addressed. Fear because he had lived so long with it, and the idea of confronting the surgery felt overwhelming. Clara noticed the tension in him immediately. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as he prepared for the journey to the town's small clinic. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'll be right there with you every step of the way." Jack gave a small nod, feeling the comfort of her presence. He had faced danger before, fought hard to survive, and endured pain most could not imagine. Yet, it was the simple act of having someone care for him that gave him strength now. Clara's steady assurance was a lifeline he had not known he needed. The clinic was small but efficient, and the doctor greeted them warmly. After a careful examination, he explained the procedure, the risks, and the necessary precautions. Jack listened quietly, nodding, his mind focused but his heart heavy. Clara stayed by his side, holding his hand, her eyes never leaving his. She offered gentle encouragement with every detail, making sure he understood but never overwhelming him. The day of the procedure arrived, and Jack lay on the hospital bed, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. He had faced danger in the wilds, endured harsh winters, and survived countless hardships, yet this moment felt different. It was not just about the surgery, it was about letting someone else be part of his healing. Clara squeezed his hand gently. "You're not alone," she whispered. "I'll be right here and we'll get through this together." As the procedure began, Jack felt a wave of vulnerability. He had spent so many years guarding himself, believing that relying on anyone else was a risk. But with Clara by his side, he realized that trust could be a source of strength, not weakness. Her presence grounded him, making the unknown a little less frightening. Hours later, the doctor emerged with a smile. "The procedure went well," he said. "The bullet is out. You're going to heal and you'll be stronger than before." Jack exhaled deeply, relief flooding through him. He had survived this, yes, but it was not just the surgery that felt victorious. It was the fact that he had allowed Clara to be part of it, to stay through every moment, to offer care and love without asking for anything in return. The days following the surgery were challenging. Jack had to rest, and the pain from the operation was sharp, though not as relentless as the years he had lived with the bullet inside him. Clara stayed close, tending to him with unwavering attention. She helped him eat, changed his bandages, and made sure he moved carefully to avoid strain. Most importantly, she was there emotionally, offering encouragement when he doubted his strength and holding space for the fears he could not articulate. Jack found himself reflecting on the journey they had shared. He remembered the first time Clara had appeared at the stables, curious and unafraid. He thought of the countless days she had stayed, watching him, helping him, simply being present. And he realized that her dedication had not only helped him physically, it had begun to heal the emotional scars he had carried for so long. One afternoon, as Jack sat by the window of his cabin, the spring sunlight warming his face, Clara brought him a cup of tea. She sat beside him, her presence calm and steady. "You're doing well," she said, "much better than I think you realize." Jack smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and vulnerability. "I couldn't have done this alone," he admitted. "Not the surgery, not any of it." "You stayed, you didn't leave." Clara shook her head gently. "I told you I would stay till the bullet was out, and even now I'll stay through everything else too." Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that touched Jack's heart in a way few things ever had. He had spent years believing that no one could endure the struggles he carried, that pain had to be faced alone. Clara had shown him otherwise. She had stayed not because it was easy, but because she wanted to, because she believed in him, because she saw his worth beyond the scars and the bullet. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's physical strength returned gradually. He could move more freely, work in the fields again, and tend to the horses without constant pain. But more importantly, his heart felt lighter. He had shared his journey, his fears, and his vulnerabilities, and had not been abandoned. Clara's presence had transformed his understanding of trust, patience, and love. They began to take walks together along the fields, enjoying the warm spring air and the sound of birds returning to the trees. Jack found joy in small things, the feel of grass beneath his boots, the gentle rustle of leaves, the laughter that now came more easily. Clara laughed often, a soft, genuine sound that filled even the quiet moments with warmth. One evening, after a long day working in the stables, Jack and Clara sat together on the porch of his cabin. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Jack felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He looked at Clara, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the sunset, and realized how much she had changed his life. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought I could feel normal again. Not after all these years, not after everything." Clara reached out, her hand resting on his. "You've always been strong, Jack," she said. "You just needed someone to stay with you, to remind you that strength doesn't always mean going it alone." Jack smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. He realized that the true healing had not only come from removing the bullet, but from the presence of someone who cared deeply, who stayed through pain, fear, and uncertainty. Clara had given him more than comfort. She had given him the courage to face life fully again. In the weeks that followed, Jack and Clara continued their routine of work and companionship, but now it was filled with a sense of hope and possibility. The town noticed the change in Jack as well. He was lighter in his movements, more open with people, and his laughter, once rare, was now frequent. Clara had helped him rediscover life's small joys, and together they were building a bond that could withstand challenges yet to come. One morning, as they rode their horses across the fields, the wind carrying the scent of fresh grass and flowers, Jack glanced at Clara. "I can't imagine going back to how things were before," he said softly. Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Neither can I," she replied. "But we don't have to, we have now, and that's what matters." Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. He had survived pain and loss, carried burdens he thought no one could understand, and faced a danger that had left a permanent mark. Yet through it all, Clara had stayed. She had been patient, unwavering, and kind. And in staying, she had shown him that healing was not only possible, it was richer, deeper, and more meaningful when shared with someone who truly cared. As the sun set that evening, casting golden light over Willow Creek, Jack and Clara sat together, watching the sky change colors. He knew the bullet was gone, but the lessons it had brought remained. Pain could be endured, trust could be rebuilt, and love could thrive even in the aftermath of hardship. And in that quiet moment, Jack realized something profound. Scars do not define a person, but the courage to let someone stay through them does. Clara had stayed. She had believed in him when he doubted himself. She had been a constant presence when life was harsh. And together they had found not just healing, but hope, joy, and the beginning of a future filled with trust, love, and shared strength. For Jack, the bullet was gone, but what remained was something far greater. The knowledge that someone could stay, someone could care, and that life, even after the deepest wounds, could be beautiful once more.